He said, "Stop, I have a gun." Turn off the flashlight, go in the ditch, face the other way. And then he grabbed Jacob when I was running. We went down the cornfield. And then after we looked back once, and there was nobody there.
The last time 10-year-old Trevor Wetterling saw his brother, 11-year-old Jacob, was 9:15 p.m. on October 22, 1989. In a scene plucked straight from a nightmare, Jacob was abducted at gunpoint before Trevor's very eyes. It would take nearly 30 years before the police realized that the answer of what happened to him had been right under their noses all along.
Get out of this house! Get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of this house!
Yeah, dirty old man.
Most of the following footage has never been seen before. The evening of October 22, 1989 started peacefully enough when 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling, younger brother Trevor, 10, and his close friend, 12-year-old Aaron, went out to rent a movie in their hometown of St. Joseph, Minnesota. Two boys were on bikes while the third rode a push scooter. Little did they know that their first exciting excursion after dark would quickly become a nightmare. Just a day later, Trevor found himself recounting the harrowing series of events to investigators from the Stearns County Sheriff's Department.
Do you remember about what time you left your house, you, Jacob?
It had to be about 8 or 8:30.
Their destination was a convenience store called Tom Thumb. The boys had biked there before, but never after dark.
So how long does it take you to ride from your house to the Tom Thumb?
It could have been a little longer, maybe 8:45.
The boys only spent about 5 minutes in the store. They rented their movie and also purchased some candy before heading home, taking the exact same route down 91st Avenue. They had no reason to suspect their return would be perilous, but what happened to the boys next was traumatizing beyond words.
When you're riding your bike right after you left Tom Thumb, did you notice anything suspicious or unusual?
No.
You indicated to us that you were leading because you had a flashlight?
Yeah.
Okay, and was in the middle because?
He had just on white clothes.
White clothes, and Jacob had?
Reflector like jogging thing.
Unfortunately, the reflective vest and flashlight might have worked against the boys rather than helping to keep them safe because someone saw them coming.
Did some guy confront you and some guy make you guys stop riding your bikes?
Oh, yeah.
Was he on your left or your right?
Left.
Side. And when you guys are riding your bikes, what side of the road were you on?
Left.
The left side.
But he wasn't really on the road, though. He came out from the driveway.
Can you tell us what this person initially said when you guys were riding by him?
He said, "Stop, I have a gun. Turn off the flashlight, go in the ditch, face the other way."
After you guys laid in the ditch, as he told you, did he walk over to you?
Yeah.
And what happened then?
He asked us all our ages.
Still held at gunpoint and terrified of what would happen if they resisted, the boys told the man how old they were. Trevor, who was 10, appeared to be discounted first, while the man compared 11-year-old Jacob and 12-year-old Aaron.
He looked at his face, told me to run as fast as I could to the woods. Well, right when he told me to run and grab Jacob. Then later on he told me to run.
And where'd you go after you guys were running?
We went down the cornfield. And then after we looked back once, and there was nobody there.
Shockingly, Trevor said the entire ordeal only took about 3 minutes. Once they were released, Trevor and Aaron raced back to the safety of the Wetterling house. Patty and Jerry Wetterling were not at home. The boys asked a neighbor to come over and help them, and he immediately called 911 to report Jacob missing.
What was Jacob last seen wearing?
Wearing a red hockey jacket that had police department on it. And it has his name on it.
Police department written in the back?
Police department is on the back. In white letters.
When it came to describing the attacker, Trevor spoke to the 911 operator directly.
Hello?
Trevor? You're talking to the sheriff's office. I want you to give me anything you can recall about this male party that approached you guys.
Well, he was like a man, sort of big.
He was large?
Sort of.
Okay.
And he had like It looks sort of like nylon thing as a mask.
Do you know what color it was?
Black.
A black mask? Do you know what color jacket he had on?
I think it was black too.
Trevor and Aaron also said that the man had a deep voice and was about 5'10" and 195 pounds. Police descended down upon the crime scene and were able to locate the exact site of Jacob's abduction thanks to the bike and push scooter still lying next to the road. However, Jacob's bike was nowhere to be found. Only Trevor's bike and Aaron's scooter remained at the scene. There was some hope that Jacob might have given the kidnapper the slip and ran off into the nearby woods like Aaron and Trevor. But when police searched the area on foot, they found no sign of him. The search continued into the next day, and based on something they found at the crime scene, the detectives had another question for Trevor.
Did you hear or see any vehicles? You're shaking your head no?
Yeah, no.
Trevor might not have seen a car, but someone else did. The abduction took place near the driveway leading to a farm owned by the Rassier family. Dan Rassier, a music teacher at a local school, lived there with his parents, who were traveling at the time of the kidnapping. Dan saw not one, but two suspicious vehicles that day. In the afternoon, he said a car drove down the drive a short way, then made a fishtail turn back onto the main road. Then that night, Dan said he was upstairs, cataloging his record collection when he heard the family dog Smokey making a ruckus outside.
Yeah, she barked that night, when the car turns around, and I turned off the light in my room thinking, well, then I could see, it's coming down.
Dan said the second car made the exact same fishtail maneuver as the one he'd seen earlier. Unfortunately, he couldn't make out many details on the second vehicle. The police would come up with a very unique plan to deal with this soon enough. Dan noted that while the car's presence was odd, he didn't yet have a reason to suspect foul play, so he went to bed, wanting to be rested for work the next morning. A short time later, though, Smokey's barking woke him back up. In an exclusive interview with Ewu, Dan talked about the events that followed.
I was sound asleep, and our dog Smokey continued to bark, and when she's barking and that doesn't stop, it's not just an animal passing through. And I got up to check it out, what she barking at, and I see pretty quick that there are flashlights up by our wood pile. And I thought, man, somebody's up there stealing wood.
Dan called 911 to report the intruders on his property before he had even heard about the horrific crime that had just taken place so close to his home. He went out to meet with the police and offered to help with the search by looking in all of the farm's outbuildings.
Went through buildings, at least for an hour, just walked through buildings with flashlights and didn't see anything. And I remember a helicopter was now cruising around the woods behind our barn that was close to the area where this boy was taken, with a huge searchlight just going through the woods. And I kept looking, and no police ever came back down to the farm.
This would turn out to be the first of many oversights in the Wetterling investigation. The next morning, the police were able to get a better look at the crime scene. Quickly, they found that the bikes hadn't been the only thing left behind. The first thing of interest were two sets of footprints. One set was quickly determined to be Jacob's, but the other was larger, and the tread pattern didn't match any of the boys' shoes. They had to belong to the kidnapper. Nearby, the police also found a set of tire tracks. They took photographs and plaster casts of both the tire tracks and footprints. But that appeared to be the end of the officer's foresight in regards to processing the crime scene, because that very morning, an egregious lapse in security occurred. Dan explained what happened to the lead investigators.
I'd taken off for school, and I got up to the top of the hill, and I think there was a yellow tape across the road, and I got to get out of here, and I couldn't drive down below because it was a cornfield, I think, or something. And there's a sheriff car over there, I think, and I ran over there, and he was kind of yelling at me because I was across that line. And then he let me drive in a ditch.
As you remember, the kidnapper had instructed the three boys to lay in that very ditch outside the Rassier farm. We'll never know what evidence might have been destroyed by allowing Dan to cross the crime scene. This would cause even more issues later when the investigators came up with a new theory about the case. Meanwhile, time was ticking away for 11-year-old Jacob. Due to the direness of the situation, the FBI and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension were recruited to help with the case. K-9 units were dispatched to help with the search, and the helicopter continued to scan the area. Additionally, officers conducted a neighborhood canvass and attempted to speak with anyone and everyone that the Wetterling family knew. They also interviewed registered offenders in Minnesota, Iowa, and South Dakota, but found no leads. Despite this monumental effort, it was as if Jacob had vanished into thin air. While the massive scope of the investigation may seem like a good thing, this might not have been the case. The investigation grew rapidly to such a degree that communication became not just difficult, but nearly impossible. The Stearns County Sheriff would go on record saying, the right hand literally did not know what the left hand was doing. As a result, leads began to fall through the cracks. One of those critical leads came to the attention of law enforcement on October 24th, just 2 days after Jacob went missing. They'd been fielding a massive number of calls from all kinds, including people who thought they'd seen Jacob to psychics. But this one was different. A boy named Chris Bertelson from the nearby town of Paynesville came to the sheriff's office in St. Joseph, claiming to have had a similar experience. And he wasn't the only one. There'd been many reports of assaults on young boys centered around that area. In an exclusive interview with EWU, Chris recounts what he told the officers in charge of the Wetterling investigation 35 years ago.
In 1987, a friend and I were riding our bikes home, and we were about half a block from my apartment building, and we had switched spots as we went around the corner, and this guy came blasting out of the trees and clotheslined my friend off the bike, and he screamed immediately. He said, "You already got me." And the guy let him go immediately and took off running.
As Chris implied, this was not the first incident in Paynesville. By this point, the young boys in town were living in terror of the miscreant they called Chester the Molester, who had been snagging children and assaulting them for several years now.
A group of us were camping, and one friend wanted to go up to this pop machine, and I said, well, I'll go with you. We're not going to have you go alone. And as we were walking up this hill from our campsite by the river toward this pop machine, we both jumped over a downed tree, and he put his hand down on this guy's head who reached up with a knife, and my friend screamed, "There's a guy out there and he's got a knife." So we sprinted back to the campsite, and there were 5 of us. We sat back to back holding knives and built this big fire until the sun came up.
Chris said that many of the kids in Paynesville started doing their paper routes and biking to school armed with knives. At one point, he said a group of boys decided that if the police couldn't stop Chester the Molester, they would do it themselves by luring him out and jumping him up.
None of us knew, obviously who this person was. He's wearing a mask. But my friend did grab his hat in 1987, May of 1987, and that hat would actually, they'd test it for DNA almost 30 years later.
Notably, Paynesville was just 28 miles or 45 kilometers from the town of St. Joseph, where Jacob Wetterling lived. The descriptions given by the boys who were assaulted also suggested that the cases could all be connected. From 1986 to 1988, there were at least 8 attacks against young boys from Paynesville. Police believed they were conducted by the same depraved individual. The victims were remarkably consistent in their descriptions of their assailant. He was a heavy-set male with a deep or raspy voice. He wore dark clothing or camouflage fatigues, and sometimes a mask or hat. On the occasions that he didn't wear a mask, the victims noted he obscured his features with mud or some form of dark paint. He was also known to use weapons, and in multiple cases told his victim to "shut up or I'll kill you," or "I'll blow your head off." This was all eerily similar to the attack Trevor and Aaron recounted. The only difference was the Paynesville boys had all been released. Jacob, on the other hand, remained unaccounted for.
I gave them a name of a guy who everybody my age in Paynesville knew was a molester. And at that time, he seemed like the guy that would probably be doing this stuff, except what we know today is that he was more of a groomer than a grabber.
The man in question was Dewey Hart, a longtime resident of Paynesville who had been accused of harming children multiple times. This was a strong lead, but inexplicably, it wasn't followed up until January of 1990, 2.5 months after Jacob was kidnapped. Instead, the search for Jacob continued closer to home. In addition to collecting leads, investigators began looking into local hotels to see if perhaps Jacob's captor had traveled from elsewhere or was keeping him in one of the rooms. Unfortunately, they quickly learned that there was a polka festival in town that weekend, so there were countless strangers in the normally quiet town of St. Joseph. Alarmingly, the police also learned that the previous summer, another pair of boys had been chased by a vehicle on 91st Street after leaving Tom Thumb. This was noted in the file, but it doesn't appear that the lead took the investigation anywhere. The police also spent more time with Dan Rassier, the school teacher who had witnessed a strange car in his driveway the night of the abduction. In an attempt to dredge up any further information he might have, the police asked him to come in for a special kind of interview, a hypnosis session. Dan agreed. The following recording of his hypnosis session reveals what an emotional ordeal this was for him.
I wish I would have. I never to see that car again. Do you feel kind of guilty or something that you didn't? Yeah. I could have stopped it from happening. What could you have stopped from happening? If I would have shined the car, the person in the car would have been the one that somebody saw.
Well, it was a dark car. It wasn't light. It wasn't a light car. It was a dark car.
Yes.
Dark blue. Black. It seems like I saw something white in the driver's seat. But it doesn't make sense.
Dan also agreed to take a polygraph or lie detector test, which would later become crucial to the investigation, though not in the way anyone expected. In addition to the possible connection to the Paynesville assaults, another boy was kidnapped and assaulted in a town called Cold Spring months before Jacob went missing. Cold Spring was barely more than 10 miles, 16 kilometers outside of Jacob's hometown of St. Joseph, and just 20 miles, 32 kilometers from Paynesville. It seems too close to be coincidence, but for some reason, the police didn't appear to be immediately convinced that the series of attacks were the work of one insatiable offender. On January 13, 1989, 12-year-old Jared Shirel was walking home from a cafe at about 9:45 p.m. when a man in a car stopped to ask him for directions. When Jared tried to answer, the driver abruptly exited the car and manhandled him into the back seat. When Jared tried to escape, even though the car was now moving again, he found that the child lock in the vehicle had been equipped and he was trapped. The driver told Jared that he had a firearm and made him lay in the back seat with his hat pulled down over his eyes. Despite this, Jared was able to notice a few things about the interior of the car, including what could have been a police scanner mounted on the dash. When the car stopped again, things went from bad to worse. The driver assaulted Jared in the back seat of the car and kept his pants and undergarments either as a souvenir or to keep the police from getting his DNA. Jared was wearing a snowsuit, which the driver let him keep after he rolled it around in the snow to obscure any DNA evidence. Then, just like what would happen to Aaron and Trevor 10 months later, the driver told Jared to run or he would shoot him. Despite the unspeakable trauma he had just gone through, Jared was able to give an incredibly detailed description of his assailant and help the police come up with this composite sketch. Despite the culprit's attempts, unidentified male DNA was recovered from Jared's snowsuit. The main method of DNA comparisons wasn't available until the next year, 1990, and law enforcement didn't have the legal authority to create a comparison database until 5 years after Jared's assault in 1994. Unfortunately, the DNA from Jared's case would be neglected for close to 30 years. The investigators were now convinced that Jacob and Jared were taken by the same man. When the police finally followed up on the Dewey lead from the Paynesville case in early 1990, he pointed them in the direction of a man named Danny Heinrich. No one had any idea how important this lead was until it was far too late. When police finally made contact with Heinrich many years later, he maintained that he was innocent.
What the hell would he even say something like that?
I don't know.
So I don't know if that's because they were putting the pressure on him for those kids, and then he thought he was trying to push it off on you, and saying you were running around tackling kids, and...
What?
Remember that? Did they talk to you about that back in the day?
No. They just asked me about Wetterling. That was it.
The reports indicate that when the police first spoke with him, they had asked Heinrich a great deal more than he insisted later. They also turned up some huge pieces of evidence, and it seemed like the case was finally gaining some traction. But that all stopped when the police made their biggest mistake yet, and abandoned the lead due to some minor inconsistencies with Jared's description of his attacker. The error wouldn't be corrected for almost 30 years. After Jacob's abduction, the other assaults in the area came to an abrupt halt. There could have been many reasons for this, but 3 potentials likely stood out. Either Jacob was being held as a long-term hostage, something had gone so horribly wrong that the offender didn't dare act again, or the offender had been scared off by the high-profile response. Regardless of the reason, it seems Jacob's disappearance had been the culprit's last attack. One day, the police and Jacob's parents hoped to know why. It would be many years before they got the chance. The investigators continued to follow up leads throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Some of the leads they chased were truly off the wall. The investigators received countless reports about devil worship and satanic cults, and they were fielding calls from psychics who claimed to have visions of where Jacob was. And then in 2004, something cataclysmic happened. After looking for 15 years, the police finally identified the vehicle seen in the Rassier driveway. Unfortunately, this was not the good news everyone expected. The newest set of investigators assigned to the case brought Dan Rassier down to the station to go over the case and shared the crushing news that would change the entire trajectory of the case.
The information we have now is that vehicle that turned up and around. Okay. We figured out who that vehicle was.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, the one at night?
Yeah. And what happened was, after the boys ran home, they called 911 or had 911 called. It went out on a scanner that boys were abducted at the end of your driveway. The people got in the car, drove to that place, drove up your driveway, drove around quick like and left.
They heard it on the scanner, so they wanted to see what was going on. But that threw the whole investigation off. Yeah. Well, if this guy would have came forth right away and the proper cop would have took the information, we would have never wasted all that time.
Apparently, the man driving the car seen by Dan Rassier came forward to identify himself shortly after the kidnapping. However, this was not factored into the investigation until 15 years later. If this was the car that Dan had seen, it meant the police had wasted a whopping 15 years on a dead-end lead. Understandably, Jacob's mother, Patty Wetterling, was incredibly upset to hear the news that the police believed that the entire initial investigation into her son's disappearance had been misguided. In fact, the police no longer believed there was a vehicle involved in the crime at all, since Trevor and Aaron didn't remember seeing a car. This would turn out to be nothing short of dead wrong. During Dan's 2004 interview, the police shared their new and very incorrect working theory.
And also we listened to the 911 tape that originally came in. And we learned a few different things from one. Pretty much have very similar statements. When they drove by the end of your driveway on the way into town, they heard some rustling kind of the weeds there. And it startled them. They pedaled faster and rode into town.
Okay.
When they came back from town, they're riding their bikes and their scooter. When they first encounter this abductor, they hear him walking down the gravel driveway. The person that did this walked right down your driveway. There was no vehicle seen. It was taken right back up towards your driveway. You look at Jacob's prints from there, they go right back up towards your house.
Yeah,
You look at other opportunities, not to mean to interrupt you, but you're home alone, your parents are gone.
Yeah.
Do you see, Dan, where we're coming from here?
I mean, if you're thinking that I did it, what can I say? Obviously, the police were very, very sloppy. I mean, they were so sloppy that, yeah, I could have done it and gotten away with it because they were so bad.
How so do you mean? How bad?
Well, they didn't come down in our yard. They didn't come in our yard for a whole week. and check our buildings. I was the one that went around in the buildings and looked that night. I mean, it was like, to me, it was a joke that they didn't check things out better.
And that's the trouble we have now is we look at all this. Yeah, you could have easily done it.
Dan, did you have something to do with Jacob?
No, I mean, what did my lie detector test show anyway? I mean, you must have looked at that.
Right.
What did it say?
It said that you didn't show any signs of deception.
That's right. Dan passed the lie detector test in 1989 with flying colors. He also didn't match the composite sketch based on Trevor and Aaron's description of the assailant. Despite this exonerating evidence, the Rassier family's involvement in the case was far from over, and they would eventually live through a nightmare of their own.
The person that took Jacob was either you or someone at your place there. And that's what we're struggling with here.
You want me to just,
Well, I want you to tell me where you put Jacob so I can go out and find him and we'll be done.
How can I prove that I didn't do it?
Would it bother you?
Would it bother me that I did it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I did something like that, I would want to be dead.
Despite the obvious pressure to confess, Dan maintained that he was innocent of any involvement in the Wetterling case. However, that didn't stop the local news from publicizing the fact that he was now a person of interest in the case. The resulting media frenzy made life hell for the Rassier family, and what happened next didn't help. In 2009, the police were still looking at Dan Rassier, and the media frenzy surrounding his family reached its peak. The police decided to involve Jacob's mother, Patty. In the 20 years since her son was taken, Jacob's parents had remained deeply involved in the search for their son, fielding even the most outrageous of leads. For example, the police received countless letters and calls reporting that Jacob had been sacrificed in a cult ritual. In 2007, Patty Wetterling was contacted by a man in Kentucky claiming to be her lost son. Patty and Jerry went to extreme lengths to connect in person with the man, only to find that his blood type didn't match either of theirs. The Wetterlings hired their own private investigators, too. Patty Wetterling became an activist for missing and exploited children, and even ran for Congress twice. Despite her unwavering dedication not just to her son, but the cause of supporting child victims everywhere, there was still no trace of Jacob. There was nothing to guarantee he was even still alive. Now, though, Patty had the chance to have a personal conversation with someone the police considered a person of interest. She sat down to speak with Dan Rassier at the local mall. Importantly, Dan had no idea that Patty was wearing a wire and that their entire conversation was being recorded.
Hey, Dan? I need to talk to you. I can't believe I need to talk to you. I need 10 minutes.
Sure.
I need you to tell me what happened that night. You were home. You're the last person close to Jacob.
I don't know if I should tell you this. And I told them what I knew for so many years, and they completely screw it up.
What happened?
I'm going to say it just as clear as I know how. The police, the FBI are idiots. I'm sorry to say that, but that's how I feel.
No, I agree with you. I mean, clearly we're not getting anywhere.
The news people came out and made me look like a jerk. They changed my voice on TV and they filmed me at school, and they made me look like I didn't give a crap about it.
But you said you went back to bed that night.
Yeah, I went back to bed after I went through all the buildings. I walked around with a flashlight. I looked around, and eventually I did go to bed. But they made it sound like I didn't care, and I just went back to sleep.
Dan also said that people were also suspicious of him since he went to his job at a local school the morning after the disappearance. Even after so many years, Dan still remembered his reasoning for doing so.
I should have never gone to school. But at that point, I never missed a day of school in all my teaching days, and that lasted for 20 years. So there was no thought in missing school.
Did they ever search your house?
Yeah, they did.
Did they?
They searched.
Did they that first night?
No, they didn't. They came back a week. I believe it was a week later.
Do you think Jacob could have been on your property? Do you think somebody else could have dragged him? I don't know what happened. This time of year is hell.
If Jacob was still alive, he would be 32 at the time of Dan and Patty's meeting.
But nobody could come on your property and bury him without you
They
guys.
could do it so easy. You know Patty.
How could they? Yeah,
They could be a deer hunter. We have people that go down there and hunt. They could.
And you wouldn't notice?
We might not even see them. Drive down in the meadow, or they could go park their car and over somewhere and just walk through the woods.
Once again, Dan's theory was closer to the truth than anyone could have predicted, though his insight didn't come from the source police expected. For now, Patty continued to press Dan with more questions about her son's disappearance.
So then I kept thinking of scenarios, and my thought was that maybe you were playing a prank or something. Because when that car came down, that would change everything. Because it was a very quick response, and then you'd have to figure out what to do with Jacob if you had him. That didn't happen?
No, that didn't happen.
You would never have harmed Jacob.
I only feel that if I would have been more alert, it's all hindsight. I could have stopped it. I could have saved him. If I would have known that car, I mean, when it turned around, I really feel that I saw Jacob looking out the window of that car.
I needed you to look me in the eye and say you had nothing to do with Jacob's disappearance.
I had nothing to do with this.
The conversation might have continued, but Dan's brother, who worked with mall security, interrupted.
Do you know the guy that's just been sitting up there for the last hour?
No, I didn't see who it was.
Because when I came out of the office, he was hanging out right there.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
The strange man Dan's brother noticed was likely one of the officers who had entered the mall with Patty. When preparing her for the interview, they assured her that there would be plenty of law enforcement personnel close by for the duration of her covert interview. In a conversation with Iwu, Dan revealed that it didn't take long for him to piece together what was happening.
And this guy just takes off a different way, runs, he disappears. And at that point, I knew something, that he was recording up there, or Patty has a recording, and Patty pretends to be completely oblivious to the whole thing.
The same evening, as their recorded conversation, Dan ran into Patty a second time. This encounter, if it can even be called that, went far differently.
And she sees me. There I am, right there in front of her. And she ignores me and walks right by me.
Dan maintained that even though he did not appreciate being secretly recorded, he didn't regret anything he told Patty and hoped some of it could help. But even this wasn't enough to exonerate Dan. And in 2010, the police descended upon the Rassier farm in force, as they admitted they should have done way back in 1989. The Rassiers consented to the search and explained that they wanted to help find Jacob in any way they could. However, when the scope of the operation continued to expand, Dan's parents quickly became upset.
They came with a lot of people. I remember that. There must have been 20, 25, 30 people on the farm. And they went through all the buildings. They moved things out. They moved things back in. They took a number of things that they thought were suspicious. They took this wooden chest that was in the house, then was in the shed, apparently had some blood on it.
Dan believed this was deer blood, but the police weren't convinced and started making arrangements to get a search warrant for the house itself. This sent Dan's parents over the edge. Police claimed Dan's father allegedly made a threat involving a firearm. Things went from bad to worse. During the farm search, the lead officer, who had previously been one of Dan's interrogators, tried to get him to help control the situation.
Do you think there's any way that you could get him and your mom to leave this morning?
No.
Because he brought up that there's a loaded shotgun in the house.
Dan tried to talk his parents into leaving, but that only seemed to make them more distressed.
Haven't we got no rights whatsoever?
Yeah, you do. But
the newscaster can get by with everything and ruin our family, but I can stand here and I can say a word and
you can't threaten people with a shotgun.
Well, she's threatened their whole life.
We can threaten anybody.
She had threatened their whole life.
I realize that.
But she can get by with it. But she can get by with it.
For just today, can we just have the shotgun go to Tony's just for today, and when we're gone, you can carry it back?
No. I'm not going to do that.
While talking with Iwu, Dan recounted how the situation spiraled fully out of control.
In an instant, they decide it was like a football, like linebackers just coming in the house. And my dad was just, and I kind of put my arms around my dad because he was just beside himself.
That house, for God's sake!
No, you're not going to go get it. I'll give you the shotgun. Yes, but you get out of this house.
For God's sake.
Get out, I'll give you the shotgun.
No.
Get out of this house. Get out of here. Get out of here. Calm down. Get out of this house.
We're walking out. Rita, we gotta leave. Come on. It's either that or Jim.
Oh, for
Come on.
God's sake.
Come on, let's go with the dance.
Oh,
Rita,
my God.
you have to leave.
I won't leave.
Okay, you're under arrest. You're going to jail. Stand up or you're going to jail.
Dan's parents were eventually convinced to go to their other son's house. Dan, meanwhile, ended up filing a formal complaint with the state, but ultimately, his case was dismissed. To add insult to injury, the police found absolutely nothing pertaining to the Wetterling case on the Rassier property, even after doing a search with cadaver dogs and excavating between 50 to 60 yards of gravel and ash from the farm's burn pit. While there were many, many bones found in the excavated material, none of them were determined to be human. At this point, the police finally had to confront the fact that they were once again way off track, and Dan Rassier had been innocent all along. Even after being exonerated at long last, though, Dan's nightmare wasn't over.
That was a mess for me because now my name was out there and parents were concerned. I had to have a person observing me all the time in the one school, and that was at least a month. And all these people that basically did this to me, my family, and to the Wetterlings, they got away with it.
Meanwhile, the investigative team held a roundtable discussion with experts from multiple agencies to review the entire Wetterling file to date. One name connected to a hastily dropped lead stood out to them: Danny Heinrich. The more they dug into Heinrich, the more suspicious he appeared. The inconsistencies between Jared's statement and Heinrich no longer convinced police he should be ruled out. 26 years after Jacob went missing, it was time to correct this massive oversight. The investigation restarted with gusto in 2015 when police conducted a search warrant at Heinrich's home.
Not this again. God. You don't realize what I went through back in that day.
No, I don't. And I know you don't want to talk about it.
No, I really don't.
But all I got is a couple little police reports. They didn't do police reports like they do now, so I don't have a lot of information. Can you remember back what they all talked to you back in the day, or?
I'd rather not go over it. I've got better feelings over it. And,
But you do know you're not under arrest. You can leave whenever you want.
Well,
we do have to search it. We have a warrant, which I'll give you a copy, so we have the right to be here. So let's just I'll try to make you most comfortable and answer any questions you want.
Heinrich, now age 53, bore a remarkable resemblance to the composite sketch from Jared's assault case in Cold Spring. He also had the correct build and voice to fit the perpetrator's description. He was a potential candidate behind the Chester the Molester attacks in Paynesville as well, since he had lived in the area at that time. Additionally, some of the Paynesville victims had reported their assailant wearing military fatigues, and Heinrich was a member of the National Guard. This wasn't the first search warrant conducted on Heinrich. When he first became a suspect in 1990, the police searched not only his house, but his parents' homes and that of a family friend for any evidence pertaining to Jared, Jacob, or the Paynesville cases. They found nothing to connect him to any of the assaults or abductions.
We're here because we'd like to solve those two cases in '89. That's why we're here. The and the Jacob Wetterling cases.
There ain't much I can help you out there at all. I have nothing on here, and I have nothing to do with them.
The 2015 warrant allowed the police to confiscate Heinrich's electronics, collect a DNA sample, and search for any sign of human remains on the property. It also gave them carte blanche to look for any of Jacob's belongings, the firearm that was used in the kidnapping, or the knives used in some of the Paynesville attacks. Unfortunately, Heinrich had quite the collection of belongings for them to contend with, but police were determined, and it wouldn't take long for them to notice more than a few items of interest.
They're going to find some things in that house that look pretty dang to me, you know.
If you're worried about, a lot of people got in their house.
Yes, I do have. See, I'm not going to lie to you there, I do.
No, okay, well, that's what a lot of guys have, especially single guys, so that's not the end of the world. It's a regular
Oh, it varies all over the board.
Dan, that's not the end of the world. We're not here. We're not looking because you got child pornography, okay?
Well, there's some.
In this case, some meant 19 three-ring binders filled with pictures of children, some of them unclothed. Other pictures of that nature were found strewn throughout the residence, along with more explicit material, and this was just the beginning.
Yeah, I'm a dirty old man.
Did you make on anything? Or did you just watch? You didn't manufacture. That's the big charge.
Now VHS tapes, can they take them or what?
Well, typically they could because they could check to see if any of them have child on them.
No, they don't.
You know, so yeah, they could take them because they're looking for child. And they could say, well, maybe they're mixed in with them. Obviously, they're not going to be labeled right. I mean, if you're saying you actually have like a big tote full of them.
Oh, that's a load of them.
Like 100 or more? Or?
Several hundred or better.
When the police eventually reviewed all the VHS tapes, they found an extensive collection of explicit material, some of which appeared to be homemade. But this was only a fraction of Heinrich's revolting stash.
You're probably a little nervous, so.
Yeah, that's natural. It runs in the family. That's why when I had that lie detector test back in the day, I failed it because I can't do it. I just can't. I'm a nervous wreck when it comes to that. So when they asked me to take the lie detector the second time, I said, no, I won't do it. That and the questions I thought alone were offensive at the time, enough to make anybody's blood pressure go up. So.
What kind of questions are they asking?
Oh, I'm not going to go over that.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious more than anything, I guess.
Well, curious? I can tell you. I can remember them. Did you kidnap Jacob Wetterling? Well, did you kill Jacob Wetterling? Did you, where'd you bury Jacob? Oh, that was in I'm getting it all mixed up.
Police obviously had to wonder if there was a more nefarious reason that Heinrich had tanked the polygraph exam back in the day. His failure there, though, wasn't the only reason he'd been such a strong suspect. The initial investigators also determined that his shoe prints matched those found at the scene of Jacob's abduction. In January of 1990, Heinrich no longer had the car he'd owned at the time of Jacob's disappearance, but police tracked down the vehicle's new owners, who allowed them to search the car. The tire tracks also matched those found at the scene of the crime. And yes, the police knew this when they told Dan Rassier they no longer thought a vehicle was involved at all. Even more incriminating was the fact that fibers consistent with the car's interior were found on the snowsuit belonging to Jared, the assault victim from Cold Spring. During the 2015 search warrant, Heinrich chatted with the police about all the other ways he had been investigated back in 1990.
They had the house surveilled. They sat just so you could see the car and followed me all over the place.
At least they tried to. With the evidence against Heinrich piling up, the police on the case in 1990 decided to place him under surveillance. However, it didn't go too well, because almost immediately Heinrich noticed and ditched the surveillance team twice.
I spent a night in the Stearns County Jail. I called my dad. I remember that night very clearly. And they interrogated me for hours, and for quite a long time. They had the big shot from, I seen him on TV, big shot from the FBI there, the top man. And but this went on and on. They had clothes laying out on a table and all this, and books. They had about 20 books or 30 books with my name on it, Heinrich, and that's all about you. I said, bull.
The clothing items the police confronted Heinrich with in 1990 were likely Jared's snowsuit and the hat taken from the Paynesville perpetrator. Unidentified male DNA was found on the clothing, and a DNA sample was retrieved from Heinrich. Mind-bogglingly, though, it doesn't appear that any comparison took place.
It just went on, and finally they booked me in. Fingerprint, took my picture.
The next morning, though, Heinrich was released. He even received a personal apology and a handshake from the Stearns County Sheriff at the time.
I've been in a lineup, too. I forgot to mention that.
Despite all of the evidence pointing to Heinrich in 1990, the police made the infuriating decision to eliminate him as a suspect after Jared couldn't definitively identify him in a lineup. Jared did, however, narrow the subjects down to 2 men, one of which was Heinrich. Unfortunately, neither Trevor Wetterling nor Aaron Larson was brought in to give a second opinion. Another reason police originally chose to discard Heinrich was his car. Even though the fibers matched, Jared described his captor's car as having automatic seatbelts and a gear shift on the steering column. Heinrich's car had neither, but when Jared saw the vehicle in person and sat in the back seat, he said he was almost certain it was the car he'd been taken in. And yet, he was still dismissed as a suspect.
Did they think back in the day, or did they know back in the day that you had some interest in boys? Is that why they talked to you think? Or
You mean it?
Hey,
1990 or whatever? Somebody said I looked like one of the sketches, but what I could never understand is if this guy wore a mask, how the hell do you know what he looks like, or how did you ever get a sketch from it?
Later, Heinrich told police that he lost 60 pounds and grew a mustache. If Heinrich was as innocent as he claimed, the police had to wonder what would motivate him to go to such lengths to change his appearance. Somehow, all of this wasn't enough to keep the lead alive in 1990. In 2015, though, the new investigators felt differently.
So you got video camera stuff in there. Do you make your own videos, or?
Oh, I did. You'd shoot and then on the computer, blow it up, whatever.
Anything you're worried about on there, or?
No. Well, if you take the tapes, there's a lot of family on that stuff, that I'll never replace, for Christ's sakes. No.
We're more concerned if you're shooting, like, young kids or playgrounds.
No. I may have shot stuff around here, just for the hell of it, but that's about it.
Yeah, but not going up and stalking little kids or nothing?
No.
Okay.
I'm not stalking nobody. No, I'm not stalking nobody.
This, police learned while reviewing the VHS tapes, was an outright lie. Heinrich had hours upon hours of recordings of children in the Paynesville area. Some of the content was suggestive and incredibly disturbing.
They showed me a couple photos in there about, looks like pictures of a paper boy on his route. Did you take those, or any surveillance photos of a paper boy, or?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Curious a little bit about that. It was kind of along the...
So those photos of those younger boys, when were those taken then? 5 years ago?
I might have got some to the internet, when I had the internet years ago.
And you just downloaded them on your computer?
Downloaded them,
so that's
printed them, printed them.
Okay.
Took up memory.
Put them in photo albums then? So that's the photo albums that they were talking about then?
Well, what is there, about 20 of them, I suppose? I haven't had the internet a long time. But when I had the internet, I was like addicted. And it wasn't just that, it was girls too,
Mm-hmm.
Might say I made a variety of everything.
Notice that Heinrich just said he made a variety, when moments ago he told police he'd never created his own explicit content. Before long, more lies would become incredibly obvious.
The only thing you think that us would look at would be that stuff?
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, that should be it. Nothing pertaining to any of the above on here. Scanners, they're in the desk. Should be 2 of them. Outdated, I can't get anything on them.
Importantly, Jared from the Cold Spring case remembered his assailant having a police scanner. During a previous arrest in 1986 for driving under the influence, a police scanner had been confiscated from Heinrich. And that wasn't the only thing that could potentially tie Heinrich to the crimes in question. As the search continued, the police learned that Heinrich was hiding more than just videos and photos.
Oh, they just mentioned they found some clothing in there that was smaller or...
Well, yeah, I don't throw anything away, so...
More like women's clothing, or...
There's probably some of that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's not on here, so...
No, I was just curious if someone else lived with you, or...
No,
was your former girlfriend or something, or...
I don't want to talk about any more of that.
Oh.
We're not trying to embarrass you. That's good.
How about little kids' clothing?
No. Nothing that I didn't probably have when I was younger. I got some plastic clothes that go back to 78.
So would they be like we got on here, we got size 14 kids clothes?
No, I got 32-inch waist.
Okay, so there wouldn't be anything clothing of like a 12-year-old boy?
No.
You may remember that after Jared's kidnapping and assault in January 1989, the perpetrator kept his pants and underwear. Jared's specific clothing wasn't found in Heinrich's house, nor was anything Jacob had been wearing, but this still stood out to police. Heinrich had no family members or close friends with children who might have worn the clothes, so they likely suspected that there was a twisted reason he was keeping the items around. Their concern only increased when they came across a pair of handcuffs stashed in a kitchen drawer. Taken together, all the evidence painted a picture upsetting beyond words.
You been following any of that junk the last years that the media throws out there on their own or not?
No, I don't follow. Why should I?
Once again, the police would soon be able to prove this was a lie. Interspersed with Heinrich's explicit material were recordings of news reports on the Wetterling case. In the ultimate display of his depravity, Heinrich recorded a documentary on how to dispose of a body right after a special released on the 25-year anniversary of Jacob's disappearance.
Like I said, I was going to burn the stuff. I thought about it, never did.
Okay. You can kind of see why I'm curious about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to burn it. I was going to burn it all. Tired of this.
I'm just going to ask you this hard question that's kind of the elephant in the room. At one time or now, is there some interest in little boys? Or?
No, I don't know.
I mean, you know, this day and age is different than way back in the day. You didn't have to hide it back. You had to hide it back then. I mean, now it's not, the shame isn't there, and it's not taboo like it was. And
oh, there is shame in this stuff.
Is that fair to say that there is some, what you might be ashamed of, interest in young boys, or?
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
On that rancid note, the police wrapped up their search warrant, taking with them all the perverted content Heinrich had amassed over the years.
Well, Danny, we're all done.
All right, sir.
They left a receipt on your table in there, what we took.
All right.
Eventually, Pat and I will talk to you about after we look at what's in there, and I just hope we could sit down and have a cordial conversation. I really appreciate you.
All right, sir.
Treating us decent today.
At this point, Heinrich likely suspected his days as a free man were numbered. And he was right. A few days after carrying out the search warrant, the lead investigators on the case came back to his house and placed him under arrest on the charge of having explicit material involving children. Still, Heinrich maintained his innocence in regards to Jacob and Jared. Frustratingly, even after discovering such a strong suspect, the police weren't any closer to locating the missing boy, or, in a worst-case scenario, his body. Police officers also made contact with Heinrich's brothers to tell them what they'd found.
So this is getting old. I put away the scumbag years ago, Dewey, Dwayne Hart, and this goes on and never ends. What's the deal? Why are they after my brother now?
Danny was arrested tonight, and Danny was arrested for federal child receipt and possession charges.
Oh, this is bullshit, man. Because I told that scumbag, it used to be a cop in this town, an officer, he's a detective now, that girls and people were being taken from Annandale, and I went to St. Cloud and told him the story, and then all this shit goes back on my brother because of dirty cops.
I know.
I don't need this.
There's going to be media attention. The Paynesville incidents. Danny.
That was not him. That was the bullshit Dewey. He admitted to it.
Be prepared when the information comes out. It's going to lead people to believe that it was your brother Danny. There's going to be talk of.
And it all started because I put that scumbag away.
Okay.
And I was the only one that wasn't scared of him. Well, my daughter's going to freak out.
This is going to impact your whole family.
Oh, God. Danny would never hurt anybody in this world.
Danny took, and he in his car, and Danny assaulted.
Danny never would touch no boy. He's never touched anyone, and he never would. I know his heart, and I know his soul.
In his home, besides the child he had hundreds of hours of videotaping neighborhood kids in Annandale and Paynesville and Benson, and where he would focus on their crotch and their rear.
Oh, I can't believe this.
He would hide his camera and put coins on the step so that a paper boy would pick them up, and then he would have the camera focus so that it would catch the paper boy bending over and pick up the coins.
This is dumb. How would you feel if somebody said that about somebody you know wouldn't hurt a fly?
Devastated.
My world just crumbled, you know what I mean?
Heinrich was also now the main suspect in Jared's assault and Jacob's disappearance.
I'm just disgusted. This is just way over the top. I really didn't believe it. I really didn't. This is just the final insult to my parents.
But this was not the only breaking news the officers were there to impart.
I mean, things have changed. We have some scientific data that links him to the Cold Spring kidnapping.
After 27 years, Jared's snowsuit was finally tested for DNA. There was an incredibly high chance that DNA could have been degraded and unusable by this point. The fact that a match was still possible was extremely fortunate. The lab results indicated a near-perfect match to the buccal swabs collected from Danny Heinrich. His DNA was also matched to the hat Chris Bertelson's friend snatched from Chester the molester back in Paynesville in the mid-'80s. Now that the police had irrefutable evidence tying Heinrich to the crime, they had some leverage. While he was in jail, they approached him with an offer. If he confessed and told them where they could find Jacob Wetterling, they would only prosecute him for the child charges, and shockingly, nothing else. Heinrich accepted. Per the terms of the legal agreement with Heinrich, no recording was allowed during his confession. However, the entirety of what he said was transcribed. Every piece of it was bone-chilling. First, Heinrich admitted that he had kidnapped and assaulted Jared in January 1989. He changed his appearance once the composite was published to avoid detection and purchased a firearm. Then Heinrich stated that he left his house on October 22nd at about 8 p.m. He didn't know Jacob, Trevor, and Aaron, but saw them riding down the road and believed they would be coming back. He pulled over to lie in wait in the driveway to the Rassier farm. Not only was there indeed a car involved, as Dan had insisted, but the tire tracks and footprints were Heinrich's. His account of the kidnapping aligned with Trevor and Aaron's statements. He threatened the boys with the firearm, made them lay in the ditch, and tell him their ages. He also made the nauseating revelation that he chose to take Jacob because he found him the most attractive. After telling Trevor and Aaron to run, he said he handcuffed Jacob with the very cuffs police had recently found in his kitchen drawer. He put Jacob in the car and made him crouch so no one could see him. Heartbreakingly, Heinrich remembered that Jacob asked what he had done wrong. Heinrich also admitted when he removed his mask in the car, he probably had no intention of letting Jacob go. The story only became darker from there. Heinrich drove Jacob back to the Paynesville area, using his police scanner to avoid law enforcement on the way. He stopped at a gravel pit on the corner of Highway 23 and Stearns County Road 33. During a jail phone call with a cellmate's friend, Heinrich revealed the unforgivable actions he took next.
You're the one that killed Jacob Wetterling, right?
Yes, I am.
Did you have with him?
Well, that's all on the news. That's yes, I did. Yes, I did. That's all public knowledge. But that was a long time ago, and I haven't done anything like that since. I quit that night when that happened. I quit, so that's the end of that.
Tragically, Heinrich revealed that he murdered Jacob the same night he abducted him. After assaulting Jacob over a period of roughly half an hour, Heinrich led him back towards that vehicle. At that very moment, a police car, lights flashing, sped by on the road ahead. Heinrich said that he panicked and told Jacob to stop walking. He drew his pistol from his coat. The first time Heinrich pulled the trigger, the weapon failed to fire. The next 2 rounds hit Jacob in the back of the head. Despite the horror of his actions, Heinrich told this to his brother Dave while incarcerated.
If I was a monster, David, I wouldn't stop 20. I stopped 27 years. I never touched anybody since that night. The monsters don't stop. They keep going. I got home that night, David, I'm going to tell you the truth. And I cried. I said, my God, what have I done? Oh. Yeah.
No amount of tears shed could make up for what Heinrich did to Jacob, or the 27 years of suffering his family went through not knowing what had happened to him. One of Heinrich's cellmates came forward to talk to police and told them Heinrich seemed utterly remorseless. He quoted Heinrich as saying the police in 1990 walked right past the gun he used to kill Jacob. During his confession, Heinrich told the police that he left Jacob's body by the gravel pit and fled to his house. Several hours later, though, he returned to cover his tracks. He buried Jacob's body in a shallow grave, using stolen equipment from a nearby construction site. He threw Jacob's shoes in a ravine. During the search warrant, Heinrich had slipped up and, shockingly, actually said he had buried Jacob before he made his confession.
Where'd you bury Jacob? Oh, that was in an item. I'm getting it all mixed up.
However, this wasn't to be Jacob's final resting place. 1 year later, while the Wetterlings still agonized over the unknown fate of their son, Heinrich returned to the scene of the crime to find that Jacob's red jacket was now uncovered. Using an army shovel and a garbage bag, he dug up Jacob's remains and reburied them on a nearby farm. He took Jacob's reflective vest home with him and kept it as a souvenir until he was investigated in 1990. When it seemed police were on his tail, he got rid of it. In a cruel twist of fate, Chris Bertelsen said that the field where Jacob was buried was a popular camping spot for many of the Paynesville boys. The survivors of Danny Heinrich's earlier crimes had unwittingly been spending their free time beside the evidence of his most heinous act. The area where Heinrich buried Jacob was also identified by another victim, though not of Heinrich, but Dwayne Dewey Hart. A man named Dan identified the same location as one where he'd been assaulted by Dewey as a child. But this wasn't the only alleged connection between Heinrich and Dewey. In the 70s, Dewey apparently dated Heinrich's mother. At the time, Heinrich was 15. His older brother has reported that he was assaulted by Dewey, and there's speculation that Dewey may have also groomed and assaulted Heinrich. Due to this connection, it's been alleged that Heinrich eventually chose the field where he buried Jacob because Dewey may have brought him there and assaulted him, as he was known to do with some of his victims. After hearing Heinrich's sordid tale, law enforcement prepared to take Heinrich out to the farm so he could lead them to Jacob's body, to prove he was telling the truth and, hopefully, finally provide closure for the Wetterlings. The first thing crime scene techs found when Heinrich led them through the fields was Jacob's red hockey jacket. Hauntingly, wrapped inside was a skull with 2 bullet holes. Next, they found a hockey jersey with Wetterling written across the back. More digging revealed more clothing that matched Jacob's last known outfit and bone fragments. The skeletal remains were taken for DNA testing and compared to Patty Wetterling's DNA. The answer was obvious. The remains were indeed those of Jacob Wetterling. In 2016, Danny Heinrich pled guilty to federal child charges. He did not admit to any involvement in the series of Paynesville assaults. Per the terms of the proffer agreement that led to the discovery of Jacob's body, Heinrich was only prosecuted for the explicit material and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Jared Shirel eventually filed a civil lawsuit against Heinrich, and in 2018 he was awarded more than $17 million in punitive damages. In one of his phone calls from jail, Heinrich expressed the concern that he would not be released after the completion of his sentence, but instead be civilly committed. Civil commitment is the legal process which allows people who are deemed a danger to themselves or others to be involuntarily admitted to a treatment facility. This could be used to prevent Heinrich from ever being released. However, the system is currently under appeal, as some argue it's unconstitutional. If it is indeed overturned, it's more likely than not that Danny Heinrich could one day walk free again.